Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining today's webinar, Coaching Questions with Impact. My name is Sue Marwood, and I'm a member of the Learning and Development team here at TMS Development International. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you before, and it's great to see so many familiar names attending today. Now, we know coaching is an area of interest to many of you, which is no doubt why today's webinar has proved to be one of our most popular webinars to date. So I'm delighted to welcome today's guest presenter, Emma Coller from Chapel House Training and Consultancy. I had the pleasure of meeting Emma last year on one of our accreditation programs, and I also recently had the opportunity to attend one of Emma's coaching and mentoring courses. So I know that you're in very experienced and creative hands for the next 30 to 45 minutes, and I'm sure you will really enjoy Emma's presentation. We have built in some time for questions at the end of the webinar, so if you would like to ask anything, just type these into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen and send that across to us, and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can in the time we have today. So thank you, Emma, for putting together this presentation, and without further ado, I will pass over to you.
Sue, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to work with the TMSDI. So kind of guess the best starting point is just to introduce myself. So my name is Emma Coller, Sue's mentioned. I am the head of learning and development for a company called Chapel House. We're based in Tadcaster, and I specialise in delivering accredited coach and mentoring training. We're accredited through both the ILM and the CMI, so the Institute of Learning and Management, and CMI is a Chartered Management Institute. I also write and deliver bespoke training packages, and we run team building days, including with the help of the TMSDI profiles, which I was trained in last year. So we use those as part of our coaching packages, which are really helpful. So a bit of background about me. I retired from the police service just over a year ago. I was a police officer for 16 good years. So I've got a very good background, really, I guess, in asking questions. Naturally, I'm quite a nosy person. So I like to ask questions, lots of questions. I was actually medically retired from the police service. I had brain surgery in 2015. So as well as being a person that likes to ask questions, having experienced such a significant life event, it really made me question lots of things about my world. And a lot of those questions really are questions that we're going to look at today. So really stuff around sort of self-confidence and personal insight and what my future was going to hold. I am married, and I've got a 7-year-old son, and I've got a 15-year-old stepdaughter, and she has just been recently teaching us the importance of eye rolling. She's very good at eye rolling, particularly when she gets asked any questions, which is always very interesting. I love sewing. Sewing's one of my big things that I love to do, just my escape, and I also teach people how to sew, which is something that I really love. So anyway, enough about me. Let me tell you what we're going to cover during the webinar. So we're going to be talking about coaching questions, but I guess really in order to do that, we first need to kind of set the context and just let you understand what my meaning of coaching is, because obviously it means very different things for different people. So for me, coaching is a conversation with a purpose. We live in, I think, what's often described as quite a time-poor world, where everyone's kind of very busy all of the time. We often don't get time to just stop and think about what our purpose in life is. I guess it's a bit like being on a treadmill. And I think as a result of that, we've developed this culture of telling rather than asking. I think because it's quicker and we want to feel valued about giving helpful advice when someone comes to us with like a problem or a goal, we often just find that we advise people. Now, I guess the problem with that is that we often advise from our own perspective. We think about, what would I do in that situation? What action might I take? What have I seen that work in these circumstances? Or what would I like to have happen? And often the difficulty with that is that it's not the same as what the other person needs to have happen. So for me, coaching is about making sure that we have a model that we can explore what the purpose or the goal or the internal or external issue or problem is for that individual with an outcome-focused solution, but importantly from their own perspective. So for me, coaching, or the job of being a coach, is about using great questions to really help open up somebody else's thought processes in ways which they might not have done before. It's quite a challenging experience having the mirror held up to you and having to really truly have a good look at yourself. And I guess the most challenging mirror is the 360 X-ray mirror, where you can see yourself from all angles, inside and out. And it's a mirror that, when held up really well, can effect great change. And as a coach, you're that person holding up the mirror. So I guess really, as a coach, you need to have a toolbox of mirrors at your disposal, kind of, having lots of mirrors that you can hold up to people so that they get the best out of that conversation. One of the challenges for coaches is that we often use the mirror that we like to look personally in. Now, obviously, thinking about mirrors is a bit of a metaphor. And I recently attended a workshop with Professor Bob Garvey. He's a professor practicing at Sheffield Hallam University in coaching. And he showed us this model, which is of dialogic choice. And I found this really interesting to think about in terms of how we present questions as coaches. And one thing that he said was that in order to get really great outcomes in coaching, it's your job as the coach to change the question to make sure that you get the right answer. And also how we think about things from our own perspectives often dictate how we ask that question. And he used this framework to sort of get us to think about the way in which we ask questions. We tend to have a preference in the way in which we ask. So people tend to be very social. They like to ask people to tell them about themselves. Some people are very technical. They want all the technical information, evidence. Some people ask questions that are very tactical. What are the options? What options are there? Or they're very strategic and they want to think about the bigger picture, so they ask lots of questions about that. Some people are great thinkers around self-insight and they want to find out how people feel, and some people focus very much on questions around behaviour, about how people might do things differently to make changes. So Garvey sort of said that we often think about questions from our own perspective. So really, I guess today is about thinking how we can change that. And I do see coaches who often say that they're stuck with clients and that they're struggling to move them forward. And one of the key reasons for that is because I've often found it's because of the kind of questions that they're actually focusing on. So let me just give you a quick example. I had a trainee coach who was working with a client who wanted to lose some weight. And they'd spent quite a lot of time talking about the options for weight loss. The client came up with great ideas about how they could lose weight, what weight loss clubs they could join, how many pounds they could lose a week. They even chose a gym membership and program, but yet they weren't successfully losing any weight. And the coach came to supervision with me and said, I just don't understand why this is happening. So we went through and picking the questions that were being asked. And it became quite obvious that the questions are about very practical outcomes for weight loss, but nothing about what it actually meant to them. So the trainee coach went back to the coaching session with this individual and just changed the direction of questions, focusing on behaviours, and it changed the outcome, and this person ended up with incredible results. So the purpose of the webinar then is to really think about the questions that we ask as coaches. So we're going to have a look at some questions around future-focused thinking, some questions about self-esteem and confidence, and then some questions around helping people to reveal personal insight. So we'll start off then with self-esteem or self-confidence. I guess two words that are used quite interchangeably a lot of the time. And we have lots of coaching clients who want to talk about how they can improve their self-confidence, their self-esteem. They often talk about it being knocked. It's a great metaphor that people use. Yeah, my confidence has been knocked, or it's low, and I want to increase it. And of course, the difficulty with self-esteem is it's not tangible. It's not something you can just easily grow. It's not a seed that we can just plant and water. Self-esteem, self-confidence are a state of being. It's who we are, and it can change on a daily or even an hourly basis. I've had lots of confidence crises in my time, but what's really important to remember is that the meaning of that changes, and it changes at different points in people's lives, and it means different things to different people. I often imagine my own self-confidence as a kind of a large, massive, gooey putty slipping through my hands. My son's obsessed with this stuff. It's called crazy thinking putty. It's really cool, and if you've not tried it, you should go and get some. But it's kind of like a firm putty, but as it warms in your hand, it starts to change consistency. It can actually begin to liquidize and drip through your fingers if you just leave it long enough. But actually it's easier to kind of pick up and screw back into a nice little tight ball, and I often think that that's what self-confidence is like. It moves around and it changes depending on where we are at any given time. Sometimes it's nice and easy and you can manage the ball, and sometimes it's just a bit out of control. And that's my metaphor. That's my metaphor for self-confidence, and of course it looks different for everybody. So we just need to think about what it means to other people, and what factors are in the room that can make that change. In fact, my last and current confidence crisis was developing this webinar. It's not something I've done before, so it's been a real test, I have to say. But it's there, and I'm sure that I'm hopefully holding the putty in a nice, clear way at the minute. So basically, when we start to talk about any conversation around self-esteem or confidence, it's really important to understand what it means to the coachee. What does self-confidence and self-esteem mean to them? And then once that's been established, you need to start looking at what does that look like right now. So great starting questions, things like, you know, kind of thinking about the interest in self-esteem. It's a very complex thing, so I just want to break it down a little further just to help us understand the process a bit better before we move on. A self-esteem is defined by our self-concept. It's about understanding the big questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What do I stand for? Who or what do I want to become? Or who or what is my motivation? They're the real big questions, and academics such as Shabelson, Hubner and Stanton around sort of 1976 sort of wrote quite extensive about the idea of self-concept, and that they argued that when we think about ourselves and how we perceive our value, it can affect our confidence. They say that if we do something that finds easy and satisfying, then we'll generally be happy to do that again and again, but actually if it doesn't work out so great, or we get some negative feedback, it can make us feel wary about trying things out, or actually we sometimes end up avoiding it altogether. But what's really interesting with this work is that it was argued that actually there's one element that can affect our confidence as a whole. So it might just be one thing that we're unconfident, but it can affect our whole confidence. And it stops being about the singular thing it started out as and just becomes a real big ball of confusion. Carl Rogers believed that self-concept had three different components: to have a view of yourself, your self-image, how much value you place on yourself, which is your self-esteem or your self-worth, and then what you really would like to be, your ideal self. I don't want to make this really academic because I'm really not an academic person at all, but I just think sometimes it's quite important when we're thinking about how we ask questions to just unpick those basic principles. Because as I've already said, it's really difficult to kind of define what self-esteem means or to put your hand on it. It's such a subjective concept, but when it's broken down, it becomes a little bit easier to help formulation of putting some coaching questions together. So we know that self-confidence stems from our self-concept, and that it's made up of these three areas: our self-image, our self-esteem and our self-worth, and that we can just get a knock to one of these areas and it can affect our whole self-confidence. So let me just give you a quick example. I was speaking to someone at a party a while back, and there was this most amazing birthday cake produced for the birthday girl, and I was chatting to this person at the moment, and the cake came out and we were singing happy birthday. And this lady, Jane, she said to me, I'd love to be able to bake cake like that. And of course, being a coach, my first response was, well, why can't you? And she said, well, I could never bake a cake like that. And so with lots of questions, I basically found out that she really had loved baking at one point. She baked all the time. It really was part of her identity. It was who she was. She loved baking cakes. She liked seeing people's faces when they tasted a cake. It was her thing. And then she said that on her daughter's birthday, it was her 18th birthday, it's a really special birthday, she'd baked a cake and she was so used to making them, she just made it that day. And for some reason, even to this day, she didn't know why, it just didn't rise. And she felt that she'd absolutely ruined her daughter's birthday party. And I've spoken to her daughter and she absolutely disagreed that that was the case. But then she didn't bake and she refused to bake and she hadn't baked since. So from actually saying that she couldn't bake, I found out that really it was a lack of self-esteem that had stopped her baking for many years. And that one incident had triggered such a bad memory that she just stopped baking. It completely knocked her confidence. Baking had been a huge part of who she was. It was part of her self-worth and it was important to her. And actually starting to unpick that and realise that it was just one isolated incident that had knocked her confidence overall, she was able to really put that into some kind of perspective. And I can really happily tell you that she now bakes again and she does make the most amazing cakes. So sometimes the questions that we need to ask are about unpicking that for somebody, looking at what that confidence actually looks like and unwrapping that for them. Now, I don't know if any of you practice kind of creative coaching, but this actually can be a really great place to start. So thinking about self-concept is often quite difficult, but using metaphors to describe it can be easier because metaphors are a great way of describing really complex situations. So when we're looking at self-concept and self-esteem, self-confidence, this is a really great place in the coaching space to get creative. I've got a huge bag full of exciting bits and pieces. I love buying stuff from Amazon, buttons and plasticine and googly eyes and pens and papers and magazines and pipe cleaners and whatnot. And I love Amazon because I can get all of this there, and it's kind of a bit of one of my best friends. I've got an app and everything. So it's a really good time to get creative if a space that fits for you and your coachee. I bet you can't guess where I am on the TMS, the team management wheel, creative innovator. So yeah, you can ask people to make images of a self-concept. It can be done by making models. This picture that's up now is a picture of someone's self-image that they've made with kind of creating out of plasticine and various bits and pieces that I often tend to collect. Because it's just an easier way to get them to think about a metaphor of what self-concept or self-image means to them. It makes it an easier place for someone to talk around. So just a little bit more about metaphors. Metaphors, as I mentioned, are a great place to start. It's hard to put questions around metaphors, but it's a good thing to think about. I just want to introduce David Grove to you. He wrote about metaphors, and basically he worked in the 80s with victims of trauma, and what he found was that people who use metaphors to describe what happened to them found it easier to talk about the incident. He went on to understand that to teach people that actually staying in the metaphor for someone can help them talk and open up more about their experiences, which is why it's a great place to use, particularly around self-esteem and self-confidence. I watched a really great TED Talk just recently. It's by James Geary, and it's from July 15, 2010. It's a bit of an old one, but it basically says that we use around 6 metaphors a minute in conversation. And what Grove said was that it's really important that if someone's talking metaphorically, that if we stay in that metaphor with them and use that clean language with them, use the same language that they're using, it can really help open up. And particularly when you're talking about a concept that's difficult like self-esteem. But what's really important here as well is to not assume what you mean by that metaphor. There are lots of metaphors such as this one, like the end of the tunnel, and it means so many different things to so many different people. So it's really important that we understand what it means to them. Someone might come to you saying their confidence has been knocked, a metaphor that I've already used several times today. And to me, this means that they had a good level of self-confidence, but it's been knocked down, making the person less confident than they were before. However, for them, a knock might be a good thing. It might be that they've never been knocked before, but actually by having that done, it's made them reevaluate what it means to them in a positive way. So it's important not to just interpret and assume, but to question. So the fundamental question wrapped up in finding out who I am, why I'm here, what does my life mean to me? Oh, gosh, all big questions, but that really helps us to understand our self-concept, what that means to us, and what we stand for. It's a huge area to break down, but once we get there, we can start thinking about questions that we can use. So a great starting point when looking at self-confidence is to start with gathering that information. And then moving on from that, self-esteem is the representation, positively or negatively, about how we feel or think about our own self-concept. I've struggled with self-confidence and self-esteem, gosh, too many times over the years. But when I look back at those times, each one represented something different. Each one had its own trigger and context. Each one had its own stick to knock me with, more metaphors. But of course, what we do know is that when we go through these times build our resilience and actually help us to deal with things easier next time. So once you started to help people to understand the bigger concept of self, you can then start to unpick what self-esteem or confidence issues look like. And it's important here to help the person understand what the issue with self-esteem or confidence can be seen in isolation, but to help them find the root cause. Like the example I gave you with Jane, it wasn't that she couldn't bake, but it was a specific incident. So find out what self-confidence or self-esteem look like, and ask them questions like, what does great self-esteem or self-confidence look like to you? How will you know when you've got the right amount of self-esteem or confidence? Make sure you're on the same page, because it will mean something different to everybody. And these questions will start to reveal what self-esteem means to them, and may start to reveal why they feel that they don't have any or that they need to improve it. And then you can start asking questions to find out specifically what they feel they're not self-confident in, and that's where you can really unpick what's actually causing the issue. And it's when you start to understand that area that you can start to work on the cause and help them build it back up. At Chapel House, we've got some coaching cards that we use. They're like a full deck of playing cards, and each suit focuses on different questions. So hearts represent questions about emotions, diamonds about skills, attributes, knowledge and talents, clubs are questions about blockages and things that hold us back, and spades, things that we still need to work on. So these questions are taken from those cards, which are really great to think about for social identities, and really making us think about our personal world. So this is one of the questions, a great coaching question around self-esteem. We all have a myriad of personal and social identities. These are how we perceive who we are in our world and how we think we are perceived by others. These can change in number and priority over time. So what would you say your main personal or social identity is? How do you see yourself, and how do you think others see you? It's a big question, so you might want to break it down into sections and allow time for thinking before moving on to the next section. And just to say that I can provide you with all of these questions after the presentation. I don't want anyone struggling to write them all down, so we can give you them later if you want them. Another great question around self-esteem. Developing a strong sense of self-worth, it's important to strengthen our self-esteem. Name 3 things that you're proud of. These can be personal achievement, things you've done for yourself or others. Try and dwell on the time and the pride you feel, and how does this change your thinking. Another question, to be totally effective in life, we must understand our own emotions and those of others. What words would you use to describe your personal emotional state right now, and what do these words say about what you may need to change to make improvements? And then finally, we'll do good and productive things each day, often without realising what we're doing. Increasing our mindfulness is good for us, so think of 6 things that indicate to you what you're doing well. What do you feel and see around you when this happens? So these are really good questions that you can ask people around helping to build self-esteem and confidence once we've unpicked that self-concept, and then self-esteem comes out of how we feel about our self-concept. Okay, so move on to future focus questions. I just really appreciate if you could just think for a minute about a problem that you might be currently facing or having to deal with. And if you can, just note it down. Just write down what that problem is. And then just leave it to one side for a minute. I think in general we've become very problem-focused in our approach to dealing with conversations. And I think it's probably because, as I've said before, we feel very time poor, yet we want to feel good about helping people out. So if someone comes to us, we often deal with their issue as a problem by giving them our worldly knowledge, our advice. It also makes the conversation much quicker if we give people advice. And then we can leave it feeling that we've done a really great job by sharing all our amazing experiences to help someone. Now, the problems with problems is that if you ask for problems, you'll always find problems. And once you've found out what to do with them, who deals with the problem, whose responsibility is it, how do you start to solve it? Coaching is very much a future-based process. It's not about looking at the past. It's about moving someone forward. But of course, in order to move people forward, sometimes we need to look back in order to process what we have done so we can make sure that we do it better. When things go wrong for us, as we've already discussed in terms of things knocking our confidence, sometimes we can dwell on that time. And it is important that that happens, but we do need to move people on. That's what coaching is about. I do meet lots of people who get stuck in the past who find it difficult to move on, and future focus questions are a really great way of moving people forward. I always remember as a police officer asked to write a package of training for some neighbourhood policing teams, and they wanted to go out and help people feel safe in their neighbourhoods. There was a particular team who'd gone out and done a survey. They'd found out what the local problems were, and people were saying that it was a park that was an issue. They told the police that the park was run down, the play equipment was broken, the needles, it was overgrown, etc., etc. And so they went out into the park and they fixed all of the problems. And then they went back to the residents and said, oh, we fixed all the problems. Do you feel happy now? And they said, well, no, we don't. And they said, oh, really? Why is that then? And said, well, because now we've got children playing in the park, and we didn't really want children playing there. Because when we see problems, we try to deal with those problems from our own perspective. So actually what I found was a really great tool called appreciative inquiry, and I taught the teams about appreciative inquiry and about changing the way in which they asked the questions, moving from problems to possibilities. So once the team had got an idea of how to use this, they went out into their community and they got everybody together and they said, what are the issues? Now for this particular community, it was a cemetery that just was a bit of a mess. So instead of asking for the problems of the cemetery, they brought everybody together and said, well, what could this look like if it was the best cemetery it could be? And then people started to dream and they started to get really excited about the prospect of making this the best cemetery it could be. And although the problems dropped out of the question and they were able to deal with them, actually it completely changed the focus in terms of how they dealt with it. So they moved from this kind of idea of problems to possibilities. So in terms of coaching people, if you can use that kind of process, then that can be really beneficial. So in a coaching scenario, you might say to someone might come to you and say, oh, you know, I'm not enjoying my job. And you might naturally want to ask questions like, tell me about that. Why don't you like it? What's wrong with it? Looking at the problems over and over again. But actually, a really great way of changing that to an appreciative inquiry, future-focused question would be to say something like, if it was the best it could be, what would that look like? Or when you turn up at work every day, loving what you do, what does that look like or feel like or sound like? And it changes the mindset. It might be that they talk about, with Csikszentmihalyi's model, the flow theory, that actually, you know, they're very bored, and they might then talk about being bored, but if you, again, change that question and don't let them dwell in the problems, you can then say to them, well, if you were in the flow, what would that look like? What's the best place it could be? I watched a video the other day, a YouTube video, a really great video about the law of attraction, and really that's what this is, moving from problems to possibilities. It's the law of attraction. It's saying, what could it look like if it was the best it could be? And they were interviewing all these celebrities about law of attraction, and one particular bit, Oprah Winfrey was talking to Jim Carrey, and he was saying that he'd wrote himself a check for $10 million, and he put the date on it. And he kept getting this check out and looking at it and feeling it, and it ended up in tatters. But by the date that he put on it, it was the first time he earned actually the $10 million from one of the first major films that he starred in. I think it was Dumb and Dumber. And Oprah says to him, wow, so visualization really works if you work hard. And he says, well, yeah, that's true, but you can't then just visualize something and go and eat a sandwich. Now, for me, coaching is about making sure that they don't go and eat the sandwich. It's about getting them to think about there's amazing possibilities that they can have in their life. But as the coach, it's about then making them kind of, you know, you being the accountability for that and making them really think about what is it they want to move on to. So thinking about the question that I asked you at the beginning, asking you to write a problem, if you now try and rewrite that from being a problem to thinking about rewriting it to become a possibility. So, you know, if you're bored and you don't like your job, that was the problem. Now think about it in a different way. What would it look like if it was the best it could be? And actually, does that feel any different for you? Does it make it feel any different in terms of making it more positive because you now have a goal to work towards? Okay, so personal insight, the kind of the last section really that I wanted to look at. So just focusing on questions around personal insight. If you read about any text to do with great leaders, what makes a great leader or makes an authentic leader, the key message that comes up time and time, you can Google this, you'll find it, is that one of the things is that they're very clear about knowing who they are and what they stand for. They have real great personal insight. I love this quote: the man who viewed the world at 50 the same as he did when he was 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. And that's really true in terms of personal insight. It's really about thinking, what does this mean to me? I'm sure loads of people have seen Johari's window, coaches particularly, and we all have these different ideas of selves. We've got our open self, information that we're happy to share with other people, and of course that becomes bigger depending on who it is that we're speaking to at any one time. We've got this hidden area that we often choose not to share with others. There's often reasons why it's hidden. It can not necessarily be there for negative reasons. It might just be that we don't know each other well enough yet, and so I've not shared that information. And of course, there's our blind self, the area which is obviously perfect for looking at in coaching sessions, particularly when you've got things like 360 reviews going on. I've coached quite a few people around 360 reviews, and it's always very interesting conversation, because this is really where personal insight comes along, where people think that they're doing one thing, but actually the feedback is something completely different. So in terms of coaching conversations around personal insight, it's a really great place to be. I often think about the metaphor that we're on a hamster wheel or a treadmill in life, and that we find that we just keep going. And it is those people that don't stop and think about their own personal insight who find themselves at 50 viewing the world the same as they did when they were 20. Coaching really is about slowing down that treadmill, putting the brakes on, and having that mirror held up. And when we have true self-insight, we become really great people. Great because when we have a better understanding of ourselves, we can see our strengths and identify our areas for development. And that in itself empowers us to make important and significant changes and improvements in our lives. So I want to share a set of questions with you that will really kind of test you. They really do make you think about your own personal insight. And I found these questions about 10 years ago. I came across them when I was researching some information. And I don't know why I didn't ever write down the source, so I can't kind of give you the author of where this came from, which is a real shame. And I've looked many, many times and still can't. And you never know, I might have even written them myself at some point. But they're really good questions that really make you kind of think about, you know, where you are at any given time. So these are the PARC principles, or the PARC questions. Really great questions to ask people when you're looking at personal insight and coaching. So P, what are the things that you have and want to protect? What are the things that you value, you don't have and you want to acquire? What are the things that you have and you don't like and want to remove? And what are the things you don't have and don't like and want to keep out? They're just great questions, right? They really tap into our values and our beliefs, really get us to think about the things that are really impacting our identity, the areas that we need to be stimulating to affect real change. And then finally, another couple of questions around self-concept. And our personal insight. So what 3 things do you keep hidden from others about yourself, and why? And how would you feel differently if these were known? Great questions linking to Johari's window as well. And then think of 2 things that frustrate you about yourself, and what can you do differently to change your view? And then what are 6 personal strengths? How are you going to make the best of those in your life? So another couple of questions really in relation to personal insight, and as I said before, I'll let you have these questions if you've not had a chance to write them down. So gosh, the time's gone really quickly, much quicker than I expected it to. I probably talked much quicker at the end there than I did at the start. So just in relation to what we've looked at, so questions are coaching questions. So we've talked about questions around self-esteem, really thinking about unpicking that and making sure we know what the self-concept is, in order that we can start to engage those questions and really focus on what they mean. Looking at future focus questions, changing people from problems to possibilities and the positive impact that that can have, and then looking into personal insight and using maybe those part questions or those other questions to get people to really think about themselves, because ultimately that's what grows us. And can also increase self-confidence and self-esteem. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you're going to take something away from the questions that I've put together. And I'm going to hand you back to Sue just to finish off.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Emma. Fantastic content in that webinar. So many ideas, so many key questions. There's really powerful questions that hopefully you'll be able to take and use in your own coaching conversations. And I always remember Emma asking me a question on the course I attended, which she was running, and it was, how bright is your light shining today? And that question's really stuck with me, and it's something that I use as well in the coaching conversations which I have with people. And it just shows that the power that a question like that, and lots of these questions which Emma has shared with us today, can really help your coachee in those conversations, sort of to delve into their thinking about those key insights that they want to share. So thank you so much, Emma. I'm sure everybody's really enjoyed today's webinar. As we said, we do have some time. We've built in that time for some questions. If you'd like to type any into the chat box, and those will come through to us. And whilst you're thinking of those, I just thought I would just take the opportunity, because I know many of you are accredited in the team management profile who are attending today's webinar. So I just thought you might find it useful to recap on just some of the ways which the profile can be used if you're coaching someone and the focus of that conversation is around their job and the work they do, because the models can give a fantastic framework around which to have those conversations. So thinking about that, the types of work model, and thinking about the individual's work preference distribution to help an individual consider the demands of their job versus where they enjoy spending their time. Is there sufficient balance? Are there areas in which they'd like to spend more or less time? Perhaps you could ask if there are opportunities for personal development, and is this something which they'd like to explore, and if so, which areas might they like to stretch into? How comfortable might they feel in doing this, and who could they talk to really help them develop, and what signs might they look out for to make sure that they're not being overstretched? Thinking about the 4 work preference measures as well. Questions a coach might ask around this, thinking about what could be the implications of your work preferences on how you work. So, for example, somebody with that introvert preference, are they constantly being asked to give presentations? How do they feel about this? If you're coaching somebody with a high flexible preference, yet their manager is very strict and deadline driven, what are the implications of this? And perhaps you could invite your coachee to consider the impact their own preferences have on those with whom they work. And you can also invite them to reflect on what might be some of the benefits of sharing their work preferences with their colleagues to enhance communication and develop better working relationships. And then the team management wheel and the profile report itself, of course, contains many chapters which can be tailored depending on where your major related roles sit around the team management wheel. And you could use the profile to support an individual through a coaching program, focusing your coaching conversations on specific chapters in the profile report. For example, if you're coaching a leader, key feedback on an individual's approach to leadership, of course, is provided in the profile report itself. It gives lots of advice and insights into areas an individual might like to work on, and also offers advice on how to approach certain situations. So it can really help your coachee to focus on areas within which they can grow and develop their talent to truly maximise their potential. And if you were to use the profile in your coaching conversations, of course, you might like to consider where your coachee's preferences lie and where they sit on the team management wheel. And we have some resources which can help you, which I know many of you use. So we have Finding the Right Question, which gives some suggestions for how you might like to phrase a question to appeal to somebody with a particular major role. And another nice resource we have is Coaching with the Team Management Profile, an Insider's Guide, which gives an overview as to what a coaching session with each of the roles around the team management wheel might feel like. And of course, all these resources you can find on the My Library section. I'll just highlight that there for you, just the My Library section when you log on to your account on tmsgionline.com. So loads and loads of resources in there for you. And of course, the team management profile is the only profile we have which can be used within coaching. We've got the window on work values profile, which looks at those 8 core value types and provides key information to really help individuals understand how their values influence their behaviour. The opportunity orientation profile is increasingly being used within resilience and measures an individual's approach to risk and determines the balance of effort people put into seeing opportunities and obstacles at work. The leading skills profile, the 360, which identifies individual performance in fundamental people, task and leadership skills. The team performance profile, another multi-rater tool which explores all aspects of a team's performance using the types of work model as a framework. And of course, our new leadership behaviours profile, another 360, which reviews an individual performance as measured by 8 factors in the leadership behaviours model, and it also provides insight into a person's emotional intelligence there. So if you'd like any more information on any of these tools, do let me know, and I'll get back in touch with you. So I hope it's given you some time to think about some questions. So we've got a question here. So, oh, we've got some nice comments. So thank you, Emma. Inspiring presentation. I'm looking at my declutter project more positively already. Love your slides too. So thank you, Rhodey, for that. Again, an inspiring presentation. Thank you, Emma. Excellent questions, giving real food for thought. We've got one question here which looks at, so does your team management profile influence the type of coaching questions you ask, and how can a person best manage that?
Oh, that's a good question. I love a good question. Yeah, I guess the thing is with team management profile, what you need to think about is that everybody has different ways of dealing with things. So although I've talked about, I am a creator, innovator, so I tend to be very creative in my coaching sessions, but equally there are people obviously that wouldn't appreciate that. So having that information can really just help to focus how you ask questions and what will sit well for individuals that you're coaching, and how to sort of structure the coaching session and what might sit well, what kind of questions might sit well, what kind of activities might sit well for someone. So yeah, it can be a really helpful tool to use.
Lovely, thank you. We've got another lady who's asking, could I see the park slide again? So I'll just pop that one up on the screen there.
Yeah, so the park side is a great one. As I say, I've really struggled to find the author of this, and well, maybe I am the author. I'm not quite sure, but I'd like to think that I would, if I had written something like that, I would remember. But yeah, and really, really great questions to really make people think about their personal insight. They're great questions to really challenge. And as I was saying before, the questions that if you're using in a coaching session, you might just ask one. Or you might send someone away with these questions and get them to think about it and then have a coaching conversation next time. Lots of different ways in which you can use it. Again, you could get somebody to make a collage or a representation of what these questions feel for somebody, depending on where they sit. So yeah, loads of different creative ways that you can use them, depending on how people feel about them.
Lovely, thank you. Got another nice comment. So thank you, Jan. So well done, Emma. I liked your focus on understanding self and self-confidence as a starting point for coaching. Thank you. So thank you to everybody for all your questions and all your comments coming in. And on behalf of everybody here at TMS Development International, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Emma for spending, I know, lots and lots of time putting together these slides and sharing such a creative and insightful webinar. As I said, I'm sure people are taking away lots of ideas and key takeaways to feed into coaching conversations. And a big thank you to everybody who's attended today's webinars for taking time out of your busy schedules. There will be a very short evaluation once we close today's webinar, so if you've got a minute to complete that, we'd be very grateful. And if you'd like to get in touch directly with either Emma or myself, our contact emails are on the screen there. So thank you once again, and we really hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And sorry, one final question here. Will we get the slides after the webinar? So Emma's very kindly offered to put together a slide set which I will forward on to you if you'd like a copy of that. So just request that in the evaluation or send me an email and we can send that across to you. And if you'd like a copy of the recording as well, we can sort that out for you. So I'll give the final word to Emma.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been challenging working on this presentation, but really enjoyable. Thank you for your great comments too. That's really nice of you.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye-bye.